So I started writing this talk with the intention of giving it at, I mentioned I was supposed to have gone to Muddy Water in Michigan last weekend. So I actually started writing this talk intending it to be given up there. And then the weather forecast was looking pretty bad. And Hedison and I decided it probably wouldn't be a good idea for me to come up there. And then, of course, as you guys know, here anyway, we got almost nothing. And I definitely could have gotten there anyway. So, but as you'll see, it's kind of timely. So I decided you're getting the Michigan talk, and they're going to get the one that I'd actually started working on to use tonight. For a number of years now, I've kept kind of a running list of ideas for Dharma talks on my phone. And sometimes an idea is not on there very long, and I end up using it up there, here, or somewhere. But there's some stuff on that list that's been on there for a really long time, and this is one of those things. This has been sitting on my phone waiting for the right moment for quite a long time. I don't know if you're the kind of person who makes New Year's resolutions. Obviously, lots of folks do that. You know, it's a popular thing this time of year to be making New Year's resolutions and talking about New Year's resolutions. I've never been one for doing that myself. I don't know this for a fact. I've not looked into research on it or anything, but my impression is that more often than not, they get abandoned pretty quickly. You know, people make big plans and they make, grand statements, and then they kind of don't stick to it, which unfortunately has the side effect of not only therefore is the person not accomplished the goal that they had the resolution about, but now they often feel disappointed in themselves because they quit or they gave up or because they just didn't manage to do what they thought they wanted to do. I've also noticed it also seems to be the case that to some extent, at least for some folks, they make the same resolution year after year. Every year, I really mean it this time. I'm really going to do it this time. It's kind of a resolution rollover kind of thing that happens, and the same resolutions get made year after year. So what I want you to think about this evening is effort, right? Effort in our practice, and I promise it does have something to do with New Year's resolution. So I'll get back around to that. The inspiration for this, and the thing that's been sitting on my phone for, as you're going to see, a long time, Tricycle Magazine, which is one of the bigger kind of non-sectarian magazines that publishes Buddhist stuff. There was a quote in the fall 2014, so that's how long this has been on my phone, 2014 issue of that magazine had a quote from Nancy Thompson, who I have no idea who she is, but this is from a blog that Nancy Thompson wrote. But the quote, I love the quote, so here's the quote. "There's no switch that turns on enlightenment. You move toward it with your effort. It's an effort that might be unrecognizable to those who think that effort means trying hard. You have to try soft, to be curious and open to whatever it is that results. Effort doesn't mean gritting your teeth and pushing through to the other side. It means sitting when you're stuck and not running away." So the author here obviously is writing specifically in the context of enlightenment, Dharma practice. So we could start with that. What's the role of effort in practice? Obviously, that depends a lot on who you ask, because if you look at the statements made by different teachers, the writings of different teachers, clearly they have really different opinions about how effort is involved. All teachers agree that effort's necessary, right? Where the difference comes into play is different traditions seem to understand what effort means differently, what exactly is involved in effort or making an effort. There are some teachers, if you look, for example, in the Japanese Zen tradition, there are some teachers there who definitely understand effort as trying hard, right? Sitting in meditation for hours and hours, driven as if one's head were on fire, as if a red-hot iron ball were caught in one's mouth, straining to keep the mind focused on the object of meditation until you're sweating blood, the proverbial sweating blood thing. A lot of effort, a great deal of effort. Other teachers Thich Nhat Hanh, for example, the Vietnamese Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh encourages a gentler approach, something more along the lines of what that quote implies about trying soft rather than trying hard. So different teachers definitely have different ideas about it. I'm gonna give you a little piece of writing here. There's a poem called the Xin Xin Ming, the affirmation of faith in mind. It's traditionally attributed to the third Chan patriarch, Jianji Senkan. So on our list there, Bodhidharma down at the bottom there on the lineage. And so if you go up 3 from there, or no, 2 from there, the third Bodhidharma was the first Chan patriarch who brought this tradition says from India to China, and then the third one up from there is Senkan. So Bodhidharma's student was Huike, and Huike's student was Senkan, and Senkan's student was Daojin, and that's the tradition goes on. So this text traditionally is attributed to Senkan. So here's the translation I'm going to read. I'm just going to read a little piece kind of from the middle of it. This was translated by Richard Clark. Things are objects because of the subject, the mind. The mind, the subject, is such because of things, the objects. Understand the relativity of these two and the basic reality, the unity of emptiness. In this emptiness, the two are indistinguishable, and each contains in itself the whole world. If you do not discriminate between coarse and fine, you will not be tempted to prejudice and opinion. To live in the great way is neither easy nor difficult, but those with limited views are fearful and irresolute. The faster they hurry, the slower they go. And clinging attachment cannot be limited. Even to be attached to the idea of enlightenment is to go astray. Just let things be in their own way, and there will be neither coming nor going. Obey the nature of things, your own nature, and you will walk freely and undisturbed. I'm about to talk a lot about the self. I'm about to use the word self a lot, which may seem odd in a Buddhist context, since one of the kind of core Buddhist ideas is anatman, which is usually translated as not self or non-self. That's allegedly one of the main ideas of the Buddha Dharma. But the way I'm using the word self is kind of more the way modern psychology uses the word self. And that, I think, is really the exact same thing as what the Buddha was talking about. Psychology self is constantly changing, the stream of consciousness. It's constructed from our experiences. It's responsive to the context that we're in. It's responsive to the people that we're around, all those sorts of things. That's exactly what the Buddha meant by anatman. There's no permanent, fixed, unchanging aspect of a person. Everything's changing all the time, like the flowing stream, right? So really, psychology self and the Buddha's non-self are pretty much the same idea. So I promised I'd get back to New Year's resolutions. Here's what I think is the big problem with New Year's resolutions. There's absolutely nothing wrong with trying to improve ourselves, with having goals in everyday life. It's really easy, though, given the way our minds work, to kind of fabricate this fantasy, imaginary, future perfect self inside of our heads. A future self that's idealized. This is the perfect me. This is the me I want to be. This is the me that would be perfect if I could just become that sort of fantasy, imaginary me that I have in my head. And once we do that, it's almost impossible not to be disappointed with who we are right now, right? By comparison to that idealized, perfected sort of fantasy about ourselves, the current self is messed up. It feels pretty messed up. So to prefer the imaginary future perfected self to the current self is not really necessarily a healthy thing. It's kind of a mistake. And this mistake can lead to a kind of desperate desire to somehow become that perfect, idealized, imaginary self, which in turn can motivate some pretty unhealthy behaviors, some mental states that aren't really very good for us based on unrealistic goals and expectations and that sort of thing. We're naturally inclined to think that the more motivated we are, the harder we try, the harder we will try, and therefore the more likely we are to succeed. The consequence of this kind of thought process, this line of reasoning, is that if we fall short of the goal, even if the goal was not a realistic goal in the first place, then we blame ourselves. Oh, I just didn't try hard enough. I just needed to try harder. That's the solution. I just need to keep trying harder. Research in psychology shows that there's definitely such a thing as being overly motivated, right? Of trying too hard. With more complex behaviors, and most human behaviors are complex, right? This actually undermines our performance. It makes it less likely that we're going to succeed. Being overly motivated leads to tension, right? Extreme tension, to anxiety, to time urgency, to mental distraction, to lack of focus. All of that leads to shaky hands, shaky mind, poor performance. Yeah, I mean, think about that kind of stereotypical horror movie scene. People are trying to escape the monster, and they get in their car, and they're trying to start the car to get away from the monster, and they can't start the car because their hands are shaking so much they can't get the key in the ignition. Obviously, this is dated, right? Who still has keys for their ignition? I can't think of a single old horror movie that didn't have a scene like that in it, where the keys are now on the floor, and now the monster comes because they were too motivated. They got too tense from being too motivated. So this brings me to my prop. Here's the reason for the prop. You may have heard of this stuff called oobleck. Ever heard of oobleck? It comes from the name of it comes from a Dr. Seuss book, but it's a real thing. I'll separate it a little bit from sitting here, so hopefully this will still work. Basically, it's just a lot of cornstarch in water, and it creates this weird kind of a gel that's referred to as a non-Newtonian fluid. That's a fancy kind of physics chemistry term for this. It's a non-Newtonian fluid. If you put it under hard, sudden pressure, it's a solid. The harder and faster you put force on it, the harder it gets. Right? It's got a little bit of loose water on the top where it's separated, but you can see what happens, right? The harder I poke, the harder it is. I'm not going through that at all. But if you ease into it gradually, then it just yields right out of the way, right? So by trying hard, you get nowhere. But by trying soft, you can get all the way down to the bottom of the container and messy. Right? So life is a little like this, right? Sometimes, at least with some things, the harder we try, the harder it becomes to succeed. And too much effort can actually undermine the very thing that we're trying to accomplish. I think it's also helpful to keep in mind that this illusionary self that we create for ourselves, that we construct from all of our changing experiences all the time, is actually a multitude of selves. There is no one self. There's the self we think we are, which is constantly changing with experience and even the mood that we're in. The self that we think we are is constantly changing. But there are also a number of kind of alternative selves, which are also constantly in flux. There's kind of this ideal self, this self that we think we want to be, but there's also what psychologists talk about, this interesting thing called the ought self. The self we think other people want us to be, or the self we kind of feel like we should be, or we ought to want to be, and then we feel like guilty or ashamed if we're not that kind of person, the person we believe that others want us or expect us to become. And there's many of those as there is people who know us, right? Everybody who knows us, we're going to have a different idea in our heads of what that person would want us to be. So when a person makes a New Year's resolution, presumably it's because they perceive some way in which the self they believe they are falls short of one of those alternatives, right? One of those other visions, one of those alternative visions of themselves. But then the question is, which one of those? Which one of those alternative selves are they trying to become? Is it their own kind of personal ideal? This is the self I really wish I were. This is the aspiration that I have. Is it the self their doctor thinks they ought to be? Is it the self that their mother thinks they ought to be, or their spouse thinks they ought to be, or some vague kind of amorphous cultural expectation? This is the self that my society has kind of got in my head that is the person I should want to be, and why don't I become that? So if we're going to improve ourselves, if we're going to try to improve ourselves, maybe we should kind of remember Nancy Thompson's advice there, right? To try softer, right? Be gentle and patient with yourself. Hold your goals lightly. Gritting your teeth and trying to shove yourself through is like trying to beat your way through that oobleck, right? The harder you hit it, you just get a sore hand. You don't get anywhere because the more force you use, the more it fights back. So remember again that what the Shinchen Ming said. To live in the great way is neither easy nor difficult, but those with limited views are fearful and irresolute. The faster they hurry, the slower they go. Just let things be in their own way, and there will be neither coming nor going. Obey the nature of things, your own nature, and you will walk freely and undisturbed. So I hope you will walk freely and undisturbed into the new year. Shambhala Shipshio, may you and all beings manifest enlightenment.